From Rags to Riches, The Rise of a Warrior. Chapter 1, The Humble Beginnings. In the dilapidated streets of Redwood City, where shadows lurked in every corner, Marco Sanchez navigated through the maze of rundown buildings and narrow alleys. His cart, a weathered wooden structure on squeaky wheels, carried the weight of his hopes and dreams, filled with the fruits and vegetables he peddled day in and day out. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows on Marco's weather-beaten face as he called out to passers-by, hoping to make a sale that would put food on his table for the night. His voice, though tinged with exhaustion, carried a note of determination as he tried to attract customers in a neighborhood where money was scarce, and survival was a daily struggle. Marco, fresh fruits and vegetables. Get your produce here, folks. Customer, stops and eyes the produce. How much for these apples? Marco, $2, sir. Customer, nods and hands over the money. As the day wore on and the sun began its descent, Marco counted his meager earnings, with a heavy heart. The coins in his palm reflected the harsh reality of his existence, a life of poverty and struggle with no end in sight. Chapter 2, Encounter with the Underworld. Just when Marco thought his day couldn't get any worse, a group of burly men approached, their footsteps heavy against the pavement. Their leader, a towering figure with a scarred face and eyes as cold as ice, exuded an air of menace that sent a chill down Marco's spine. Scarface, as Marco would come to know him, demanded payment for protection in exchange for keeping Marco's stall safe from harm. The threat hung heavy in the air, tangible and suffocating, as Marco weighed his options. Scarface, you're operating in our territory now, kid. Gotta pay up if you want to stay in business. Marco swallows nervously. I can't afford to pay you. I barely make enough to feed myself. Scarface grabs Marco by the collar, his grip like a vice. Listen here, punk. You either pay up or suffer the consequences. Capice? Just when Marco thought all hope was lost, a sleek black sedan pulled up beside them, the sound of its engine cutting through the tense silence like a knife. A well-dressed man stepped out, his demeanor oozing confidence and power. It was Don Salvatore, the notorious crime lord who ruled over Redwood City with an iron fist. Chapter 3, A Deal with the Devil. Don Salvatore's piercing gaze swept over the scene before him, taking in every detail with a calculating eye. Marco's heart pounded in his chest as he braced himself for whatever fate had in store for him. Don Salvatore smirks, his voice smooth as silk. What do we have here, boys? Looks like we've got ourselves a fighter. Marco, voice trembling. I don't want any trouble, sir. I'll pay, I swear. Don Salvatore chuckles darkly. Relax, kid. I'm not here to shake you down. In fact, I think you might have what it takes to work for me. Marco's mind raced as he processed Don Salvatore's words. Working for a crime lord was not something he had ever imagined for himself, but in a world where survival was a daily battle, sometimes desperate times called for desperate measures. Chapter 4, Training Montage. Under Don Salvatore's watchful eye, Marco embarked on a journey into the heart of darkness, a world where the line between right and wrong blurred into shades of gray. The training facility, hidden beneath the surface of the city like a viper waiting to strike, became Marco's new home as he immersed himself in the ways of the underworld. From dawn till dusk, Marco underwent grueling training sessions alongside the other enforcers in Don Salvatore's organization. Sweat poured from his brow as he pushed himself to the limit, determined to prove that he was worthy of his newfound mentor's trust. The training regimen was relentless, demanding nothing less than absolute perfection in every aspect of combat. From hand-to-hand combat to marksmanship, Marco honed his skills with single-minded determination, channeling the pain and frustration of his past into raw, unbridled power. Marco squared off against a seasoned veteran in the training ring, his muscles coiled like springs as he prepared to unleash a storm of violence upon his opponent. The air crackled with tension as they circled each other, their movements fluid and precise like dancers in the midst of a deadly ballet. With a roar of defiance, Marco launched himself forward, his fists a blur as he rained blow after blow upon his adversary. The sound of impact echoed through the cavernous chamber, mingling with the grunts of exertion and the harsh clang of metal against metal. But his opponent was no pushover, his years of experience evident in every move he made. With a swift counterattack, he landed a devastating blow to Marco's midsection, sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain. Blood trickled from a split lip as Marco fought to regain his footing, his eyes burning with determination as he faced down his opponent once more. With a primal roar, he launched himself forward once more, his every movement fueled by the fire burning within his soul. As blow after blow rained down upon his opponent, Marco felt a surge of triumph coursing through his veins. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he was destined for greatness, that nothing would stand in his way as he clawed his way to the top of the underworld hierarchy. Chapter 5: The Rise Begins. With his training complete, Marco emerged from the depths of the training facility a changed man. His body honed into a weapon, his mind sharpened to a razor's edge, he was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Under Don Salvatore's watchful eye, Marco proved himself to be a valuable asset to the organization. His reputation as a skilled fighter spread like wildfire, earning him respect and fear from both allies and enemies alike. As Marco's influence grew, so did the power and reach of Don Salvatore's empire. Together, they controlled vast swaths of territory, their grip on the city tightening with each passing day. But with power came enemies, and Marco soon found himself embroiled in a deadly game of cat and mouse with rival gangs and ambitious upstarts seeking to challenge his newfound authority. Marco and his crew found themselves outnumbered as they clashed with a rival gang in the heart of Redwood City. The streets ran red with blood as bullets flew and bodies fell, the sound of gunfire echoing through the night like a symphony of death. With a roar of defiance, Marco charged into the fray, his fists blur as he laid waste to all who stood in his path. His every movement was a dance of death, his every strike a testament to the years of training that had brought him to this moment. But his opponents were no amateurs, their ranks bolstered by seasoned veterans and ruthless mercenaries. For every blow Marco landed, another two seemed to take its place, his body battered and bruised as he fought to keep himself and his comrades alive. With a primal roar, Marco unleashed the full force of his fury upon his enemies, his every blow fueled by a burning desire for victory. Blood sprayed like rain as bodies fell, the ground slick with the crimson tide of battle. But even as Marco fought with all his might, he knew that victory was far from assured. For in the underworld, the only thing more dangerous than your enemies is your allies, and betrayal lurked around every corner like a shadow waiting to strike. Chapter 6: Clash with Rival Gangs. As Marco's influence continued to spread, so did the number of enemies seeking to challenge his power. Rival gangs and ambitious upstarts saw Marco's rise as an opportunity to seize control for themselves, leading to a series of brutal clashes that shook the very foundation of Redwood City. Marco's heart pounded in his chest as he led his crew into battle against a rival gang that dared to encroach upon their territory. The streets erupted into chaos as bullets flew and blades clashed, the air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and blood. With a roar, Marco charged into his enemies, his fists burning with energy as he struck down all who stood in his path. His every movement was a symphony of violence, his every strike a result of his hard work and training. But there are many opponents, and their numbers overwhelming as they pressed forward with unrelenting ferocity. With sweat pouring down his brow and adrenaline coursing through his vein, Marco fought on, his determination unwavering in the face of overwhelming odds. He knew that defeat was not an option, that failure would mean death or worse. Marco attacked, his every strike a devastating blow that left a trail of broken bodies in its wake. Blood stained the streets as the battle raged on, the cries of the wounded mingling with the roar of gunfire in a cacophony of death and destruction. Chapter 7: Forming Alliances. In the aftermath of the bloody clashes with rival gangs, Marco realized that to secure his position and expand his influence, he needed more than just brute force. He needed allies, powerful allies who could help him navigate the treacherous waters of the underworld and solidify his hold on Redwood City. With this realization burning in his mind, Marco set out to forge alliances with other influential figures in the criminal underworld. He knew that in this world, trust was a rare commodity, but he was willing to take the risk if it meant securing his place at the top. Marco, we need to expand our reach if we want to survive. I propose we form an alliance with the Delgado cartel. Don Salvatore, I like the way you think, Marco. Make it happen. With Don Salvatore's blessing, Marco reached out to the Delgado cartel, a powerful organization with ties to the drug trade and smuggling operations that spanned continents. Their leader, Hector Delgado, was a shrewd and ruthless businessman with a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. After weeks of negotiations and tense meetings, Marco finally brokered a deal with Hector Delgado, solidifying an alliance that would bolster both their positions in the underworld hierarchy. With the resources and manpower of the Delgado cartel at his disposal, Marco's empire began to expand at an unprecedented rate, his influence spreading like wildfire throughout Redwood City and beyond. But even as Marco celebrated his newfound success, he knew that in the world of organized crime, alliances were fleeting and loyalty was a rare commodity. He would have to tread carefully, for one wrong move could mean the difference between life and death in a world where betrayal lurked around every corner. Chapter 8: Betrayal and Redemption. As Marco's empire continued to grow, so too did the shadows of betrayal that lurked within his own organization. For every ally he gained, there were whispers of treachery and deceit, threats to his power that loomed ever closer with each passing day. It was on a dark and stormy night that Marco's worst fears were realized. A trusted lieutenant, a man he had considered a brother, betrayed him, selling out their secrets to a rival gang in exchange for power and influence of his own. The news hit Marco like a punch to the gut, leaving him reeling with shock and disbelief. How could someone he had trusted with his life turn against him so easily? How could he have been so blind to the darkness that lurked within his own ranks? With a heavy heart and a fire burning in his soul, Marco confronted his betrayer, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. Marco, how could you betray us like this? Betrayed ally laughs coldly. It's nothing personal, Marco. It's just business. Marco clenches his fists, his voice trembling with rage. You'll pay for this, I swear it. With a heavy heart and a determination burning in his chest, Marco knew that he had to act quickly if he was to salvage what remained of his empire. He gathered his most trusted allies, those who had stood by him through thick and thin, and together they formulated a plan to root out the traitors in their midst and reclaim what was rightfully theirs. What followed was a brutal campaign of vengeance and retribution, as Marco and his loyal followers hunted down those who had betrayed them, leaving a trail of blood and destruction in their wake. It was a battle for survival, a fight for their very lives, and Marco vowed that he would not rest until every last traitor had been brought to justice. But even as Marco fought to reclaim his empire, he knew that the wounds of betrayal ran deep, and that redemption would not come easily. It would take time and sacrifice, and a willingness to confront the darkness that lurked within his own soul. But Marco was determined to see it through, for he knew that in the end, it was not power or wealth that defined a man, but the strength of his character and the courage of his convictions. Chapter 9. With the traitors rooted out and justice served, Marco's empire stood on more solid ground than ever before. But he knew that in the world of organized crime, complacency was a luxury he could ill afford. If he wanted to stay on top, he would need to continue expanding his territory, seizing control of lucrative businesses and territories from his rivals. With his goal burning in his mind, Marco set his sights on the docks, a hub of activity and commerce that held the key to untold riches. But he knew that the docks were also a hotbed of criminal activity, controlled by rival gangs and warlords who would stop at nothing to protect their turf. Undeterred by the dangers that lay ahead, Marco rallied his most trusted allies and set out to claim the docks as his own. It was a daring gambit, fraught with peril and uncertainty, but Marco knew that if he succeeded, the rewards would be more than worth the risks. Marco and his crew descended upon the docks like a force of nature, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight as they clashed with rival gangs and mercenaries in a battle of supremacy. Bullets flew and blades clashed as Marco fought tooth and nail to establish his dominance, his every move calculated and precise as he cut a path of destruction through his enemies. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night like a symphony of death as Marco's forces pressed forward, their determination unwavering in the face of overwhelming odds. But for every foe they felled, another seemed to take their place, their ranks bolstered by reinforcements pouring in from all sides. With sweat pouring down his brow and blood staining his hands, Marco fought on, his resolve unbroken in the face of adversity. He knew that victory was within reach, that all he had to do was keep pressing forward, keep fighting until the last enemy had fallen and the docks were his to command. And finally, after what felt like an eternity of bloodshed and carnage, victory was theirs. The docks belonged to Marco now, a shining jewel in his ever-expanding empire, a symbol of his strength and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. But even as Marco celebrated his triumph, he knew that the battle was far from over. For in the world of organized crime, there were always more enemies waiting in the shadows, more battles to be fought, and more territory to be claimed, and Marco was more than ready to rise to the challenge. Chapter 10. The Love Interest. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed that defined Marco's world, there was one ray of light that shone brighter than all the rest: Sophia. Sophia was unlike anyone Marco had ever met before. Beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent, she captured his heart from the moment he laid eyes on her. But she was also a woman with secrets, a past shrouded in mystery and intrigue that only served to deepen Marco's fascination with her. Their first meeting was a chance encounter in a smoky bar on the outskirts of town, where Marco had gone to drown his sorrows after a particularly grueling battle. Sophia was sitting alone at the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand and a distant look in her eyes that spoke of a pain that ran deeper than any physical wound. Marco approaches the bar, his gaze lingering on Sophia. "Mind if I join you?" Sophia looks up, her eyes meeting Marco's with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "I suppose not. But I warn you, I'm not exactly great company." Marco smirks. "That's all right. I've never been one to shy away from a challenge." And so began a whirlwind romance that would defy the odds and change both their lives forever. Marco and Sophia were like two sides of the same coin, different yet somehow perfect for each other in ways they couldn't begin to understand. Their relationship was a tumultuous one, filled with passion and longing, joy and sorrow. But through it all, they remained steadfast in their love for one another, a beacon of light in a world consumed by darkness. But even as Marco and Sophia found solace in each other's arms, they knew that their love was not without its challenges. With enemies lurking around every corner and danger lurking in the shadows, they would have to fight tooth and nail to keep their love alive, to ensure that it survived the trials and tribulations that lay ahead. But Marco was determined to see it through, for he knew that in a world where betrayal and treachery were commonplace, love was the only thing worth fighting for. And he would do whatever it took to protect Sophia, to keep her safe from harm, even if it meant sacrificing everything he held dear. Chapter 11. The Femme Fatale. As Marco's empire continued to expand, so too did the shadows of danger that lurked in the corners of his world. Among the threats that loomed large was a woman named Isabella, a seductive and cunning figure who had her own ambitions in the criminal underworld. Isabella was a master of manipulation, using her charm and beauty to ensnare those foolish enough to fall under her spell. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, her presence felt but never seen, her motives shrouded in secrecy and intrigue. It wasn't long before Isabella caught wind of Marco's rise to power, and she saw in him an opportunity to further her own agenda. With a smile that was as deadly as it was beguiling, she set out to seduce him, to weave her web of deceit around him and bend him to her will. At first, Marco was oblivious to Isabella's true intentions, drawn in by her beauty and charm like a moth to a flame. But as he spent more time in her company, he began to sense that there was something off about her, something that set his instincts on edge. Isabella, smirks, her voice dripping with honeyed words, you're different from the other men in this world, Marco. There's a kindness in you that I've never seen before. Marco raises an eyebrow, his gaze searching. And what is it about me that you find so intriguing, Isabella? Isabella laughs softly, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Oh, I think you know, Marco. You and I, we're cut from the same cloth. We're survivors, fighters, willing to do whatever it takes to get what we want. Marco couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella was playing him, that she was using him as a pawn in her twisted game of power and control. But try as he might, he couldn't resist the pull of her allure, the magnetic force that drew him to her like a moth to a flame. As their relationship deepened, Marco found himself torn between his feelings for Sofia and his growing fascination with Isabella. He knew that he was playing a dangerous game, that Isabella was a woman with secrets that could destroy him if he wasn't careful. But try as he might, he couldn't stay away, couldn't resist the siren song that called to him from the depths of the darkness. And so Marco found himself caught in a web of deceit and betrayal, torn between two women who represented the light and the darkness, the angel and the devil on his shoulder, and as he struggled to navigate the treacherous waters of love and loyalty, he knew that the choices he made would have far-reaching consequences that would shape the course of his destiny forever. Chapter 12, Showdown with the Warlord. As Marco's influence continued to grow, so did the whispers of a looming threat on the horizon, a warlord known only as El Diablo. Rumored to be a ruthless and merciless tyrant who ruled over his territory with an iron fist, El Diablo had set his sights on Redwood City, determined to crush anyone who stood in his way. Marco knew that if he wanted to protect his empire and the people he cared about, he would have to confront El Diablo head-on, to face the danger that lurked in the shadows and emerge victorious against all odds. With his allies by his side and his resolve as strong as steel, Marco prepared for the battle of his life, knowing that the fate of Redwood City hung in the balance. The night was dark and foreboding as Marco and his forces descended upon El Diablo's fortress, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight as they prepared for the coming onslaught. The air crackled with tension as they approached the imposing gates, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. With a roar of defiance, Marco led the charge, his sword held high as he charged headlong into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The sound of battle echoed through the night like thunder, the clash of steel against steel mingling with the cries of the wounded and dying. As Marco fought his way through the ranks of El Diablo's army, he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins, driving him forward with renewed determination. With each foe he felled, another seemed to take their place, their numbers seemingly endless as they pressed forward with unrelenting ferocity. But Marco was no stranger to adversity, no stranger to the heat of battle. With each blow he landed, he felt the weight of his destiny pressing down upon him, the knowledge that he alone held the fate of Redwood City in his hands. And then, at last, they reached the heart of the fortress, where El Diablo himself awaited them, his eyes burning with hatred and malice as he prepared to unleash hell upon his enemies. But Marco was undeterred, his resolve unbroken as he faced down the greatest challenge of his life. With a battle cry that echoed through the night, Marco charged forward, his sword flashing in the darkness as he clashed with El Diablo in a duel that would determine the fate of Redwood City itself. Chapter 13, Battle of Titans. The clash between Marco and El Diablo was a spectacle of epic proportions, a battle that would be sung about in the annals of history for generations to come. Two titans, each fighting for their own vision of the future, locked in mortal combat, with the fate of Redwood City hanging in the balance. As the two warriors clashed, the air crackled with energy, their blades flashing in the darkness as they traded blow for blow with unmatched ferocity. Marco's movements were swift and precise, his years of training evident in every strike as he danced around his opponent with grace and agility. But El Diablo was no mere thug, no simple brute to be underestimated. He was a master of combat in his own right, his strength and skill matched only by his ruthless cunning. With each blow he landed, he sought to break Marco's spirit, to crush his resolve and leave him broken and defeated. But Marco would not be so easily swayed. With a roar of defiance, he unleashed the full force of his fury upon El Diablo, his every strike fueled by a burning desire for victory. Blow after blow rained down upon his opponent, each one landing with the force of a thunderbolt as Marco fought with all his might to overcome the seemingly insurmountable odds. The battle raged on, the sound of steel on steel echoing through the night like a symphony of destruction. Blood flowed freely as Marco and El Diablo clashed, their movements a blur of motion as they fought tooth and nail for supremacy. But in the end, it was Marco who emerged victorious, his blade piercing El Diablo's defenses and striking true. With a cry of triumph, he dealt the final blow, sending his opponent crashing to the ground in a heap of broken flesh and shattered bone. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded into the night, Marco stood victorious, his chest heaving with exertion as he surveyed the carnage around him. Redwood City was safe once more, its streets cleansed of the darkness that had threatened to consume it. But even as Marco basked in the glow of his hard-won victory, he knew that the fight was far from over. For in the world of organized crime, there were always more enemies waiting in the shadows, more battles to be fought, and more territory to be claimed. And Marco was more than ready to rise to the challenge, to face whatever dangers lay ahead with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. For he knew that in the end, it was not power or wealth that defined a man, but the strength of his character and the courage of his convictions. Chapter 14, Rebuilding and Reconciliation. With the defeat of El Diablo, Marco emerged as the undisputed ruler of Redwood City, his victory celebrated throughout the streets as a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of adversity. But amidst the jubilation, there was still much work to be done. The city lay in ruins, its once thriving neighborhoods reduced to rubble by the fires of war. Homes and businesses had been destroyed, families torn apart by violence and bloodshed. If Redwood City was to rise from the ashes, it would need a leader capable of guiding it through the difficult days ahead. With this realization weighing heavy on his heart, Marco set out to rebuild what had been lost, to heal the wounds of war and bring hope to those who had been left behind. With Sophia by his side and the support of his loyal allies, he began the arduous task of reconstruction, determined to make Redwood City stronger and more prosperous than ever before. But amidst the chaos of rebuilding, Marco found himself grappling with his own demons, haunted by the memories of those he had lost along the way. His mind was consumed by thoughts of the friends and comrades who had fallen in battle, their faces forever etched into his memory as a reminder of the cost of war. Sophia places a comforting hand on Marco's shoulder. "You've done so much for this city, Marco. You brought hope to people who had none and fought for justice in a world consumed by darkness." Marco sighs heavily, his gaze distant. "But at what cost, Sophia? How many lives were lost because of me? How many families torn apart by the violence that I unleashed?" Sophia leans in close, her voice gentle. "You can't blame yourself for the actions of others, Marco. You did." With Sophia's words ringing in his ears, Marco knew that he could not dwell on the past. The future of Redwood City lay before him, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of hope and prosperity. And with his unwavering resolve and the support of those who believed in him, he knew that anything was possible. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Redwood City began to rise from the ashes, its streets bustling once more with the sounds of life and laughter. The scars of war remained, a reminder of the trials and tribulations that the city had endured, but they were overshadowed by the spirit of resilience that burned bright in the hearts of its people. And amidst it all, Marco stood tall as a beacon of hope, a symbol of strength and courage in a world plagued by darkness. For he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as he had Sophia by his side and the support of his loyal allies, there was nothing they couldn't overcome together. Chapter 15: The Enemy Within. As Redwood City began to rebuild and Marco's influence solidified, a new threat emerged from within his own organization. Whispers of discontent spread like wildfire through the ranks, fueled by jealousy and greed, as ambitious lieutenants vied for power and control. Among them was Antonio, a cunning and ruthless enforcer who saw Marco's rise to power as an opportunity to further his own ambitions. With a smile that was as sharp as a knife and a mind as cold as ice, he plotted and schemed in the shadows, biding his time until the moment was right to strike. Marco knew that he had to tread carefully, that the danger posed by his enemies within was just as great as any external threat. With Sophia by his side and the support of his loyal allies, he set out to root out the traitors in his midst and protect his empire from those who sought to tear it apart from within. Marco addresses his inner circle, his voice filled with determination. We have enemies within our own ranks, my friends. Traitors who seek to undermine everything we've worked so hard to build. But mark my words, we will find them, and we will deal with them swiftly and decisively. Sophia nods in agreement, her eyes blazing with determination. We stand with you, Marco. Whatever it takes to protect our city and our people. Lieutenant steps forward, his gaze cold and calculating. And what if the traitors are closer than you think, Marco? What if they're right here, in this room? Marco narrows his eyes, his voice steely. Then they will be dealt with accordingly. Loyalty is not just a word, it's a code that we live and die by. And those who betray that code will suffer the consequences. With tensions running high and suspicion hanging in the air like a storm cloud, Marco knew that the time for action was at hand. He would have to act quickly and decisively if he was to protect his empire from the enemies within, to ensure that the sacrifices of the past were not in vain. But as Marco delved deeper into the shadows, he realized that the true enemy was far more insidious than he could have ever imagined. Dark forces were at work, unseen and unknown, pulling the strings from behind the scenes as they plotted to bring about Marco's downfall. And as the web of deceit closed in around him, Marco knew that he would have to confront the enemy within head-on, to face the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men and emerge victorious against all odds. Chapter 16: Unveiling Betrayal. As Marco delved deeper into the heart of his organization, the true extent of the betrayal became clear. Antonio, one of Marco's most trusted lieutenants, had been working behind the scenes to undermine him at every turn, plotting to seize power for himself and destroy everything Marco had worked so hard to build. With the evidence in hand, Marco confronted Antonio in a showdown that would determine the fate of Redwood City and the future of his empire. Marco stood face to face with Antonio in the dimly lit warehouse, the air thick with tension as the two men locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Antonio's expression was cold and impassive, his gaze like ice as he stared back at Marco with a mixture of defiance and contempt. Marco holds out the incriminating evidence. You thought you could betray me and get away with it, Antonio. But you underestimated me. You underestimated the loyalty of those who stand by my side. Antonio laughs coldly. You're a fool, Marco. A naive fool who thinks he can hold on to power forever. But the truth is, power is fleeting. It's only a matter of time before someone stronger comes along to take it from you. Marco narrows his eyes, his voice dripping with venom. You're the one who's naive, Antonio. You thought you could betray me and get away with it. But now, you'll pay the price for your treachery. With a roar of defiance, Marco lunged forward, his fists a blur as he unleashed a storm of violence upon his former lieutenant. Blow after blow rained down upon Antonio, each one landing with the force of a sledgehammer as Marco fought with all his might to bring his traitorous foe to justice. But Antonio was no pushover, his years of training evident in every move he made. With a swift counterattack, he landed a devastating blow to Marco's midsection, sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain. Blood trickled from a split lip as Marco fought to regain his footing, his eyes burning with determination as he faced down his opponent once more. With a primal roar, he launched himself forward once more, his every movement fueled by the fire burning within his soul. The battle raged on, each blow bringing Marco one step closer to victory as he fought to overcome the treachery that threatened to tear his empire apart. And in the end, it was Marco who emerged victorious, his blade piercing Antonio's defenses and striking true. As Antonio lay defeated at his feet, Marco knew that the battle was far from over. For in the world of organized crime, there were always more enemies waiting in the shadows, more battles to be fought, and more territory to be claimed. And Marco was more than ready to rise to the challenge, to face whatever dangers lay ahead with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. Chapter 17, Rebuilding Trust. With the traitor Antonio dealt with, Marco faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust within his organization. The betrayal had shaken the foundation of his empire, leaving doubts and suspicions lingering in the minds of his allies. To regain their loyalty and prove himself worthy of their trust, Marco embarked on a campaign of transparency and accountability. He opened himself up to his allies, sharing his vision for the future and laying bare the challenges that lay ahead. He vowed to lead by example, to always put the needs of the organization above his own ambitions. Marco addresses his inner circle, his voice firm and unwavering. We've been through hell and back together, my friends. We faced enemies from without and traitors from within. But through it all, we've stood united, bound by a common purpose and a shared vision for the future. Lieutenant nods in agreement. But how can we be sure that history won't repeat itself, Marco? How can we trust that you won't lead us down the same path as Antonio? Marco meets his gaze with steely resolve. You have my word, my friend. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust, to prove myself worthy of the title of leader. But I can't do it alone. I need each and every one of you to stand by my side, to hold me accountable for my actions, and to help me rebuild what was lost. Sophia steps forward, her voice filled with conviction. We believe in you, Marco. We've seen the sacrifices you've made and the battles you've fought. And we know that you will do whatever it takes to protect our city and our people. With the support of his allies and the determination burning in his heart, Marco set out to rebuild his empire stronger than ever before. He knew that it would take time and patience, that trust was not something that could be earned overnight. But he was willing to do whatever it took to prove himself worthy of the title of leader, to ensure that the sacrifices of the past were not in vain. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Marco's efforts began to bear fruit. The doubts and suspicions that had plagued his organization began to fade away, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Redwood City was safe once more, its streets cleansed of the darkness that had threatened to consume it. And amidst it all, Marco stood tall as a beacon of hope, a symbol of strength and courage in a world plagued by uncertainty. For he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as he had the support of his allies and the trust of his people, there was nothing they couldn't overcome together. Chapter 18, Expansion and Alliance. With trust rebuilt within his organization, Marco turned his attention to expanding his empire beyond the borders of Redwood City. He knew that to truly solidify his power and influence, he would need to forge alliances with other criminal organizations and extend his reach into new territories. One such opportunity presented itself in the form of the Russo Syndicate, a powerful crime family with interests that spanned the entire West Coast. Led by Don Vincenzo Russo, a wily and cunning patriarch with decades of experience in the underworld, the Russo Syndicate controlled vast swaths of territory and had connections that reached into the highest levels of government. Marco saw in Don Russo a potential ally, someone who could help him navigate the treacherous waters of the criminal underworld and expand his empire beyond the confines of Redwood City. With this goal burning in his mind, he reached out to Don Russo and proposed a partnership that would benefit them both. Marco meets with Don Russo in a dimly lit restaurant, his voice low and confident. Don Russo, I come to you with a proposal, an alliance between our organizations that would benefit us both. Don Russo studies Marco with a shrewd gaze, his expression unreadable. And what, pray tell, do you have to offer me, Marco? What could you possibly bring to the table that I don't already have? Marco smirks. Power, influence, and a shared vision for the future. Together, we could rule the West Coast, control the flow of goods and money, and ensure that our enemies never dare to challenge us again. With his silver tongue and persuasive charm, Marco managed to win over Don Russo and secure an alliance that would change the course of history. Together, they forged a partnership that would see their organizations working together to expand their influence and crush anyone who dared to stand in their way. As the months passed and their alliance grew stronger, Marco's empire expanded beyond the borders of Redwood City, reaching into new territories and establishing a foothold in cities and towns across the West Coast. With the support of Don Russo and the Russo Syndicate, Marco's influence knew no bounds, his empire stretching from the bustling streets of Los Angeles to the windswept shores of San Francisco. But even as Marco celebrated his newfound success, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. For in the world of organized crime, alliances were fleeting and betrayal lurked around every corner. But with the support of his allies and the strength of his convictions, Marco was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, to ensure that his empire would stand the test of time. Chapter 19: The Price of Power. With his empire expanding and alliances solidified, Marco found himself faced with a new set of challenges. The more power he amassed, the more enemies he made, both within and outside his organization. And as the stakes grew higher, so too did the risks he faced. One such risk came in the form of a rival syndicate, the Montoya Cartel, led by the ruthless and cunning Elena Montoya. Determined to carve out her own piece of the criminal underworld, Elena saw Marco as a threat to her ambitions and set out to eliminate him by any means necessary. The tension between Marco and Elena simmered beneath the surface, a powder keg waiting to explode at the slightest provocation. And when a series of skirmishes broke out between their respective organizations, it was only a matter of time before all-out war erupted. Marco stood on the balcony of his penthouse, overlooking the city skyline as tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Below, the streets buzzed with activity, the sounds of sirens and gunfire echoing through the night as Marco's forces clashed with those of the Montoya Cartel. Sophia, approaches Marco, her expression grave. We can't keep going on like this, Marco. The violence, the bloodshed, it has to stop. Marco sighs heavily, his gaze distant. I know, Sophia. But Elena won't rest until she's taken everything from us. We have to fight back, or risk losing everything we've worked so hard to build. Sophia takes his hand in hers, her eyes filled with determination. Then let's fight. Together. We've faced worse odds before, and we've always come out on top. We can't let fear or doubt hold us back now. With Sophia by his side and the support of his loyal allies, Marco prepared for the battle of his life. The streets of Redwood City became a battleground as his forces clashed with those of the Montoya Cartel, the air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and blood. But even as Marco fought tooth and nail to protect his empire, he knew that the cost of victory would be steep. Lives would be lost, families torn apart, and scars that would never fully heal. But he also knew that he could not back down, could not let fear or doubt dictate his actions. For in the end, the price of power was one that Marco was willing to pay, no matter the cost. Chapter 20: The Final Showdown. As the conflict between Marco's empire and the Montoya Cartel reached its climax, tensions escalated to a boiling point. The streets of Redwood City became a war zone, with each side fighting tooth and nail for supremacy. Buildings crumbled, gunfire echoed through the night, and blood stained the pavement as the battle raged on. Amidst the chaos, Marco and Elena found themselves on a collision course, their fates intertwined in a final showdown that would determine the future of the criminal underworld. Marco stood alone in the heart of the city, the smoke and chaos swirling around him like a storm. In the distance, he could see Elena's forces advancing, their weapons gleaming in the firelight as they closed in for the kill. Elena emerges from the shadows, her voice cold and deadly. "You fought well, Marco. But it ends here. Tonight, Redwood City belongs to me." Marco meets her gaze with steely resolve. "You'll have to pry it from my cold, dead hands, Elena. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked so hard to build." Elena smirks. "We'll see about that." With a roar of defiance, Marco charged forward, his sword flashing in the darkness as he clashed with Elena in a duel that would determine the fate of Redwood City itself. Blow after blow rained down upon them, each strike fueled by years of pent-up rage and determination. But Elena was no pushover, her skill and cunning matched only by her ruthless ambition. With each blow she landed, she sought to break Marco's spirit, to crush his resolve and leave him broken and defeated. But Marco would not be so easily swayed. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he fought back with all his might, his every movement fueled by a burning desire for victory. And then, in a final, desperate gambit, Marco delivered a blow that sent Elena staggering backward, her defenses shattered and her resolve broken. With a cry of triumph, he dealt the final blow, sending his foe crashing to the ground in a heap of broken flesh and shattered bone. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded into the night, Marco stood victorious, his chest heaving with exertion as he surveyed the carnage around him. Redwood City was safe once more, its streets cleansed of the darkness that had threatened to consume it. But even as Marco celebrated his hard-won victory, he knew that the battle was far from over. For in the world of organized crime, there were always more enemies waiting in the shadows, more battles to be fought, and more territory to be claimed. But Marco was more than ready to rise to the challenge, to face whatever dangers lay ahead with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. For he knew that as long as he had Sophia by his side and the support of his loyal allies, there was nothing they couldn't overcome together. And with that, Marco turned his gaze to the future, ready to embrace whatever challenges and opportunities awaited him in the days to come. The end.
We do it.